Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 3rd, 2022, and just 4 days before the Pennsylvania statewide recount of the GOP primary for Senate was set to finalize, David McCormick, the runner-up in this primary, has now conceded to Mehmet Oz in this Republican primary, resulting in a nomination for Dr. Oz. Now, the reason why this race had not yet been called is because of how insanely close the margin was. And this primary actually occurred on May 17th, 2022. So just about 2 to nearly 3 weeks ago, we had a primary in which we could not find a declared victor. In the final results, what you are going to find is that it was extremely narrow. The margin of victory for Mehmet Oz over David McCormick, just under 1,000 votes, with 1.34 million votes cast in the entire primary. The margin of victory was so narrow that it triggered a statewide recount, and that recount has yet to be completed. There also was a lawsuit from David McCormick's campaign, Dave McCormick, officially, who had asked the Commonwealth Court to rule that the Pennsylvania GOP primary must count undated ballots. Unfortunately for Dave McCormick, the number of undated ballots totals to about 800, meaning that 800 there really isn't going to change much, especially when the margin of victory is above 800. The only real hope for Dave McCormick in this situation would be that the undated ballots would narrow up the race enough that a recount could potentially change the results by 200 to 300 votes, slightly putting him ahead. However, that seems to not be the case. There's a reason why David McCormick is now choosing to concede, and apparently it's because, based off of what we have seen thus far in this recount from those on the inside, that David McCormick is only gaining a handful of votes, meaning, technically speaking, less than 10 from where he was before. This recount probably wasn't going to uncover much, but he realizes now that it becomes much more unrealistic for him to have a pathway to victory. Even though he had a momentary victory yesterday when the court ruled that they must count the undated mail ballots, including the U.S. Supreme Court having a stay on the decision from the former court back, the third court, I believe, back in 2021 during the recount there where they forcibly counted undated mail-in ballots. So it looked as if it was slightly good news for Dave McCormick, but I think he slowly realized and came to this understanding that the GOP is only fractured further by this continuation of a GOP primary, even if there is a very slim chance of victory, which I understand why he held on to it for so long as well, mainly because it made sense. The only thing preventing Dave McCormick between the U.S. Senate and nothing is this GOP primary, because realistically speaking, had Dave McCormick became the nominee, he would have been more electable than Dr. Oz and probably could have defeated John Fetterman. But that's besides the point. The point of this video is to talk about this concession and what this actually means as we now head into the general election, especially as Dr. Oz declared himself the presumptive nominee just about a week ago. So upon reading this article, you can see a little bit more in the understanding as to why there was this decision on behalf of Dave McCormick. They talk about the very narrow lead, 0.07%, and how Dr. Oz ignored initially the calls from President Trump to declare victory immediately, but later went on to do it, I believe on May 27th. Yes, May 27th, he declared himself the presumptive nominee, actually 1 week ago today, and decided to not practically wait for this recount, instead moving forward to the general election entirely. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the move forward towards the general election is smart in political practice, and I think that the voters are ready for Dr. Oz to take forth as the GOP nominee. But a week ago, I don't know if that was entirely true. Obviously, that doesn't matter now as we head into the midterms with Dr. Oz as the nominee. It doesn't even seem as if the betting markets are even considering a McCormick victory. If you take a look at the numbers, what do you find? While McCormick was at a very high point way earlier on, he is now down to less than a cent practically, down to 1 cent for a yes share, 99 cents for a no, meaning that it is all but certain that Dr. Oz wins this Senate primary, at least according to the political betting markets and also according to Dave McCormick. Now, we officially have a GOP nominee, which means we are going to see a full general election swing. But the also big factor within this Senate race isn't on the Republican side. It is also on the Democratic side. I should rephrase that. It is not only on the Republican side, but also on the Democratic side. John Fetterman had a stroke on primary day on May 17th. And after that stroke, he has yet to hit the campaign trail despite winning his primary by a pretty overwhelming amount. When you take a look at his victory, John Fetterman won across the state of Pennsylvania with 59% of the vote to Representative Connor Lamb's 26%. Now, on the same day that he had a stroke, sure, maybe voters decided to move away from him last minute, but the point is that he won his primary overwhelmingly. It was called that evening, and yet he still has yet to hit the official campaign trail. And this isn't to say, Democrats haven't been advocating on behalf of John Fetterman and against both Dave McCormick and Dr. Oz. There was a brief time where, the Democrats were sending out messaging against both of them because there was no certainty as to who was going to win. I made a point talking about how the Democrats had this advantage about 2.5 weeks ahead of the GOP to campaign in the general election, and partially it is true. But on the other hand, it's also not, because John Fetterman himself isn't the one doing the campaigning. It's more so the Senate Democrats, more specifically the DSCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which very much serves as this political action committee to advocate and elect Democrats and re-elect Democrats across the nation. They label Dr. Oz as someone who is a Hollywood scam artist and Dave McCormick as a Wall Street insider. They send out these ads and have been doing so because we haven't seen that much engagement and that much campaigning from John Fetterman. So now that we are in a position that John Fetterman still has yet to hit the campaign trail, and though his doctor says that it's possible for him to hit the campaign trail, though he has not seen a doctor in the past 5 years, there is going to be, number one, an issue raised about his health and concerns of that nature, and number two, he also poses a bit of an inability to campaign at this point in time, meaning that Dr. Oz, someone who wasn't even declared the victor until about an hour ago, could hit the campaign trail earlier than a Democrat who won his primary on May 17th. So obviously, this circumstance with John Fetterman is very unfortunate for him, for the Democratic Party, and for his family. Obviously, a stroke is a very big deal. And voters do care about health concerns. We saw it with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. We saw it with Biden and Trump in 2020. We saw it with John McCain in 2008. And it also permeates its way into congressional races. And as much as this would like to be a non-issue for Democrats across the nation, in the state of Pennsylvania, voters will keep in mind that John Fetterman had a stroke. People will keep that in mind when they go to the ballot box. Is it enough to shift up the race? I don't know. I can't give you a declaration about that point. I think there will be many more issues that are much more mainstream than John Fetterman's health. But I think Pennsylvania could be amongst the closest Senate races of the 2022 election cycle. It could be decided by purely thousands of votes, meaning that maybe something could have changed had that stroke not occurred, or had John Fetterman returned to the campaign trail earlier. And had this doctor not released this note, pretty much scrutinizing John Fetterman for his decisions relating to his health. These are things that don't help the Democratic Party, but I can't say the GOP is in a better position now. To only win your primary practically 3 weeks later is also quite an embarrassment. I'm not going to sit here and say, it's Dr. Oz's fault that it was so close, even though I would say he probably should have done better considering he had the Trump endorsement. But I will say that these circumstances have not helped. Putting yourself in a position where about a third of the Republican primary voters here aren't going to be happy with the nominee for Dr. Oz. There was a very much unified Trump force with Kathy Barnett and Dr. Oz, but obviously in a state that doesn't have ranked choice voting or an instant runoff system, it seemed as if it was much more closer than it was. But I think there still is a disgruntled 1/3 of the Republican primary that didn't want to go with Kathy Barnett or Dr. Oz, that wanted to go with Dave McCormick. Now that Dr. Oz has this GOP primary, sure, I think many people are going to be appeased and absolutely will vote for Oz in the general election. But I can't say this has been an easily fought primary. I cannot say this has been an easily fought nomination on behalf of Dr. Oz. Now that we're heading into the full general election, I am hopeful that more data will come out from the state, because polling has been very hefty on the Republican side, on the Democratic side, but on the general election, there actually hasn't been that much. There was only a singular poll for Dr. Oz versus John Fetterman, and it's a Democratic-leaning pollster from Data for Progress. In fact, this is a polling firm that was established by John Fetterman. So this polling company, Data for Progress, administered a poll from December 3rd through December 5th, 2021, months ago, 6 months ago at that, showing that John Fetterman defeats Oz by about 2 percentage points, but still 13% of the state relatively undecided. Voters aren't sure who they're going to back, and we have so little data currently within this race. Looking at the rankings, what we have so far is toss-up, tilt-R, toss-up, 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 toss-up. Almost every single group, Cook Political Report, Sabato's Crystal Ball, Politico, Real Clear Politics, Fox News, all have it as a toss-up. The only change is inside elections with a tilt Republican characterization. But even then, that's so exceptionally close that I could imagine it going either way. Right now, I still have the Democrats up in the state of Pennsylvania, but obviously things can change. And I do think things might change. Dr. Oz, I don't think is the strongest GOP candidate at all. I think that Dave McCormick was a much stronger candidate. I think there is a very real possibility that, let's say Dr. Oz does lose this election, that had Dave McCormick been the Republican nominee, that he could have won. Neither of them, I think, are the best options for the Republican Party. There were many who decided to decline to run that probably could have been better, and the initial frontrunner, obviously, was completely removed from the race on his own accord. That was Sean Parnell, who was the frontrunner, endorsed by Trump for a significant period of time, ended up endorsing Dave McCormick, surprisingly enough, almost beat Connor Lamb in a 2020 House race in Pennsylvania's 17th district, narrowed it up significantly. Many people thought that he was going to be the Republican nominee. He ultimately withdrew because he said he wanted to focus on his family. He wanted to focus on the relationships between his children and his wife. And what we have found is that now he's been replaced by Dr. Oz, a TV personality. I honestly don't know how this race is going to go, but the point on the Republican side is that this race is over. While Dave McCormick might still try to see what happens with the undated ballots, and of course the recount could completely upend the GOP race, at the end of the day, a concession isn't enough to say, let's say the votes end up showing that Dave McCormick actually end up winning the primary, that Oz gets the nomination. Just as of right now, it looks as if the Dave McCormick isn't going to pursue any further action, but the recount is required by Pennsylvania law. Obviously, McCormick could reject the recount, but he would have had to have done that before June 1st. The recount is still underway. And the courts are already making their decisions and have made some decisions pertaining to the undated ballots. So potentially speaking, there might still be some level of argumentation within the state of Pennsylvania, but as of right now, it looks as if, with near certainty, that Oz is going to be the Republican nominee. So what I was also trying to talk about is that I truly have no idea as to how this general election is going to go. I think it could go either way. I think the Democrats do start out with the favorites against Oz. I just don't see him as this electable and strong candidate that I think many Republicans want to paint him as. At the end of the day, Oz is not from the state of Pennsylvania. He doesn't live in the state of Pennsylvania. He hasn't won any electoral race in years past. If anything, he only has name recognition because of his celebrity status. And while that worked for Donald Trump, and I think a lot of people are incorrectly drawing comparisons here, Dr. Oz is by no means as good of a campaigner. And there's a reason why many Make America Great Again Republicans opted for Dave McCormick or Kathy Barnett over Dr. Oz. He doesn't come across as genuine. While John Fetterman is a staunch progressive and will likely be viewed as a more extreme version of potentially another Democratic candidate or another Democratic senator such as Bob Casey, or potentially more progressive than the governor, Tom Wolf. What we will find is that I think John Fetterman will face some pushback for some of his stances, but I can't say that he hasn't been tried and tested. Obviously, he was carried across the finish line with Tom Wolf, but he also might have won a lot of those votes entirely on his own. John Fetterman serving as the lieutenant governor at least gives him some level of electability and some level of credibility and name recognition. Dr. Oz has it from being a celebrity. John Fetterman has it from being a politician. And those are very different things. Donald Trump's victory in 2016 also wasn't that large. Not enough, I would say, for Dr. Oz to rely on. There are things within this Senate race that could completely change the trajectory of it, including Dr. Oz's nomination. Republicans were much higher in terms of being the favorites to win the Pennsylvania Senate race. You can see it even on the political betting markets. But once Dr. Oz became the nominee, and it seems as if the presumptive nominee, it has become neck and neck. At one point, Democrats were above Republicans, and now in the most recent numbers, it's neck and neck again. What was a 60-40 margin is 53-51. That's not where the GOP wants to be in a state that barely voted for Biden because it also barely voted for Trump. Oz might luck out. He could very well end up in the U.S. Senate, and I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility whatsoever. I think it very well can happen and might happen. But I will say, I don't think Oz is the strongest nominee. I think Dave McCormick would have been better, but obviously I'm not the one making these choices. McCormick is the one who chose to concede today. The Republican primary voters are the ones who chose to elect Dr. Oz to be their Republican nominee, and we will see what happens this November. A lot of wild cards now playing into the Pennsylvania Senate race as well, damaging the Democratic Party, which means neither party could have an extremely strong nominee that they otherwise might have thought they would have had for an extremely competitive state. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.